from all over India. So in this series today we have Padma Shri Dr. Rajagopal and Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya talking on two important topics. I need not introduce them, our chairperson will introduce them. Both are known, well known to you all. And it is our endeavor to give more topics with the good faculties and which are interesting to one and all. With this brief introduction, I request President Dr. Madani Abdul Nasser, EKM Abdul Nasser, to request our National President for his address. Over to you, President, sir.
Respected President ISA National Dr. Muralidhar Joshi, Secretary Dr. Naveen Malhotra, President-elect Dr. Venkatagiri, our Secretary Dr. Benil, our esteemed faculty members of today, my teacher Padma Shri Dr. M.R. Rajagopal, the founder and chairman of Pallium India, and Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya, professor and ex-HOD of anesthesia, KMC Mangalore, and today's moderator and chairperson, Dr. A.S. Kameswara Rao, past president, ISA National. Dear senior members and officials, I am very happy to welcome you all to this sixth webinar of ISA Kerala State Chapter. I can say that today we are really honored to have Padma Shri Dr. M.R. Rajagopal, the founder person who has established the concept of Pallium India. Is what started from Calicut and spread over all over the state and to the national level. And I am really honored and happy to welcome you, sir, to this meeting, because he was one of the unavoidable and part of the ISA Kerala State Chapter. Sir, I am really happy and welcome you to this meeting on behalf of ISA Kerala State Chapter. Professor Rajagopal, sir. Rajagopal sir can't hear. I am sorry for that. Just look into that. And second speaker is a very important topic, safety in anesthesia practice by Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya. He is a well-known teacher, postgraduate teacher, and a very relevant topic of today's practice. Sir, I am very happy to welcome you to this meeting. Today's session is chaired by Dr. Muralidhar Joshi, President ISA National, and Dr. A.S. Kameswara Rao, past president of ISA National. Sir, I welcome you to this meeting. I welcome our secretary, Dr. Naveen Malhotra, our state secretary, Dr. Benil Isaac, all the senior officials and senior members and all delegates to this meeting on behalf of ISA Kerala State Chapter. Now over to Dr. Naveen Malhotra just for a few words to the delegates. Sir, Dr. Naveen Malhotra, please, sir. Naveen, sir? Naveen, sir, is there?
I think he has not yet logged in. We can request President Muralidhar Joshi's words.
Okay. Over to the president, Dr. Murali sir, President ISA National, who is also chairing the session, just to give just to address this meeting delegate. Sir, over to.
I'm sorry. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yes.
Dr. Nazar.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hear
we
me?
can hear you, sir. Please.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me for this great event where Rajagopal sir also is there and Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya also is there, and it's an honor for me to be part of this webinar. What Kerala State Chapter is doing, it's fantastic, and it's only thing is, at least I would like to say, like, Telangana is getting stuck with COVID. This thing we are seeing the surge for a couple of months. It's going to be a bit tight. Like my hospital, almost that's what I was talking about, Giri. Almost 95-98% we have the COVID patients now. We can't refuse admissions. We have to admit everyone. Almost 5-6 hospitals are full and all, but still the capacity is still large and all those things. But again, I would like to say, like, COVID is part of our life. It's not a big thing. We have to do this work also, and we have to do that also. And I'm happy Kerala State has taken care of a lot of academic activities in the web form and all those things, because where we can't meet physical and all. I think that's the way to go. Let's not highlight COVID too much about this one. That's part of our life, like what we had with HIV, HPCG. It'll be one more thing, maybe a couple of months down the line. Not to get bogged about all these things, but once again, I'm happy to have to interact with Dr. Rajgopal sir and Dr. Matsuno Upadhyaya. Wish the Kerala State chapter all the best. This is a greetings from ISA National Headquarters. Once again, all the best. All the best, Dr. Giri, Dr. Najar, and Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Vinny.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, sir. Now, over to the chair. Dr. Kameshwarao, please take over for the discussion.
Okay, sir. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I thank the Kerala State Branch for giving me the opportunity as a moderator of this important session. And I appreciate that Venkatagiri, the President-elect ISA, along with the active and dynamic President and Secretaries of Kerala Branch, for regularly organizing these academic activities. And the sixth in a row. And the very important topics are covered. And today I am happy, my guru, Dr. M.R. Rajgopal Garu, under whom I was trained for the pain and palliative care in the year 2000. And I hope he remembers me well, I believe. And he is a well-known Indian palliative care physician. He is the founder chairman of Pallium India. And Pallium India, and he did a lot of service in Kerala. And his contribution to palliative care in India is very significant. And he is awarded with Padma Shri in 2018. And a documentary film based on M.R. Rajgopal's life titled Hippocratic Experiments in Taking the World was released by Moonshine Agency Australia on the World Palliative Care Day on October 14, 2017. Rajgopal's advocacy has contributed to amendment of Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Drug Substances Act in 2014, and in its implementation, a critical step in reducing needless suffering and allowing millions to access pain relief. He was also the prime mover in the creation of National Program for Palliative Care by the Ministry of Health, Government of India. In 2014, Dr. Rajgopal was honored by Human Rights Watch with Alison D. Forges Award for extraordinary activism in recognition of his tireless efforts to defend the right of patients to live and die with dignity. He is also the past president of ISA Kerala and also delivered Venkatrao oration in ISA. He is an active member of ISA also, did a lot of work in palliative care, and a very important topic of communication skills, particularly in the terminally ill patients and those who are very anxious, which is a very important topic for everyone. And I request my Guruji to deliver his lecture. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Kameshwar Rao, Giri, Nasser, Dr. Muralidhar Joshi, and everybody, and all office bearers of ISA. Thank you all for your affection and for the honor of this privilege of addressing you this evening. Of course, you are not so easily forgotten, Dr. Kameshwar Rao. And thank you for your patronage of the cause.
Thank you, sir.
So do I understand correctly that the time for the talk is 30 minutes, or is it 30 minutes? I can adjust. Is it 30 minutes? Am I audible to everybody?
30 minutes you can take, sir. For 10
You
minutes.
can take your time, sir.
Okay.
You can take your time.
your own time, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. In 2014, the World Health Assembly, that's the decision-making body of WHO, asked all members to care into all healthcare. Several countries have moved forward with this, but not much in India here. But essentially, what it is, as a palliative care that I am going around with, is not really needed special rule. Complete. So essentially, what I'm saying is, whatever I am saying,
Hello? Hello, Dr. Giri.
Sir is not audible now.
Not audible. You have
Uh,
muted Dr. Rajgopal, sir.
Connection in between, but I hope you can hear me now. You can't
Sir,
hear me?
we are able
You
to
can.
hear, sir. We are able to
Oh
hear.
my God, this is very bad.
Sir, you can do one thing. You can cut your video and you can talk, sir. That will be better.
Trying to give. Okay. Thank you. I hope I am audible now.
Sir. It is better now.
Am I audible?
It is
Oh,
better,
this
sir.
is
It is
bad.
good now.
Okay.
You're audible, sir.
I was saying palliative care has supposed to be integrated into all healthcare in any field, including management of humanitarian crisis, COVID. 2 weeks back, again the World Health Assembly passed a resolution saying that palliative care has to be integrated into core care also. And whatever I am saying today is valid for any specialty. Binil, so you are helping me with the slide. Can I request you to go on to the next one?
Yes, sir.
I am just taking a few minutes to see how people see us anesthetists. This is from a doctor. I told the anesthetist I was allergic to pain and cannot stand needles. Perhaps that made him nervous. Could not get my pain. He had given me a local, but then he started poking me without local. I still have nightmares about it. She happened to say this because she knows me personally. The a local anesthetic before a cannulation may be something that you do not want for yourself, but everybody is not the same. That is standard international practice now. And when we do not really give attention to people suffering, this is how people rest. Please, can you move the slide to the next one, please? Are you having a problem?
Sir.
Yes. I mean, am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
I cried out in pain, and he muttered, he means the anesthetist, muttered something about neurotic people. Somehow, it feels the most insulting words spoken to me.
Hello? The audio is not there.
I am so bad.
Sir. Can't hear, sir.
Vinil sir, you called him
Yes. No, I didn't call him.
because he got disconnected.
Let me check, sir.
Okay.
I'll call him.
It must be poor bandwidth. ರೋಲಿನ್ ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೆ
Not reachable.
Probably he had some internet problem.
Sir, rejoined or
താങ്കൾ വിളിച്ച വ്യക്തി മറ്റൊരു കോളിലാണ്.
sir, can you hear, sir? Rajagopal sir. Rajagopal sir, കേൾക്കാവോ?
I have switched to
Yeah.
another connection. Can you
Okay,
hear me now?
Yes,
Ah,
sir.
yes,
It's
sir.
clear now. It's clear now.
Oh,
Now
I'm
it is
so
clear.
sorry. I mean, I can't, because of the screen, I can't see the video. So I hope that I am in the field.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We are in the field.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you heard this. I was just saying that we anesthetists are seen by people very often only for a few minutes, and how they see us depends on their behavior, their experience during that time. It is not fair, because your work and my work in the operation theater spans over many hours, and they are judging us by the experience of a few minutes sometimes, or longer in the intensive care unit. Binil, can you move the slide to the next one?
Yes, sir.
I don't have to read it out. This was actually an IAS officer. Having an IAS doesn't mean that the people can be very brave in operation theaters. And she says, I was trembling with fright, and the doctor said, don't be a baby, grow up. And she adds, I will never forgive him. Next one. And this was by the twin brother of a patient who died. He says he was in severe pain after his operation. Later, it turned out that he had a hematoma inside, which was causing all the pain. It seems he folded his hands and begged the doctor, I cannot bear this pain. I did not get a wink of sleep last night. And the doctor said, "Do you want me to sing a lullaby and rock you to sleep?" Next, please. And the same man says, My brother died 2 weeks later. I have this constant thought in me. I want to pick up a knife and stab that man." So, I mean, as you can see, I have lived forever, so many years. And these are some of the bad experiences that I have heard with my own ears. Next, please. The problem is they themselves are not in the best of emotional state when we do this. They are weakened by disease and fear, and they are particularly vulnerable. An occasional word which would have been quite okay to live with in ordinary course of events becomes unbearable when they are vulnerable. Next, please. All those were terrible stories. Here is something nice for a change. This person under spinal anesthesia, she actually wrote this her story in Malayalam Manorama Weekend magazine many years back. She wrote it when she was in her 60s. She is writing about her experience as a young person. This must be long before I started on anesthesia. I do not know who this anesthetist was. I tried to find out at that time. I don't know. This person said at the age of 17, she was undergoing surgery under spinal anesthesia. And she was motherless. Her father was her single parent. And she started sobbing. And the surgeon got angry and said she would stop the surgery and send me out. That made me even more scared. Next, please. Then I felt a hand on mine. A voice that I recognized to be that the anesthetist said, "Don't cry, I shall look after you." I felt as if it was God Himself. My sob subsided, and I lay clinging on to that hand. The rest of the story is that because I saw this, I wrote to the woman who had written it. I just wrote it care of Manorama, and we are in touch. She still lives in a suburb in Kottayam district. What she said was, the doctor in between, I obviously wanted to free his hands, but she wouldn't leave. She had such a clasp that till the surgery was over, she clutched that hand. And why? Because he said, "I will look after you." She felt protected to know that somebody really cared. And just as a needle poke, somebody saying, "Don't be a baby," these turn out to be the most insulting things in their lives, just because that was at a time when they were weakened and vulnerable. Similarly, the smallest act of kindness is gratefully remembered forever. Next, please. So this is the background with which I am going to talk briefly. I would like everybody to think, what would be your response if the patient says, "I am scared. Doctor, I am scared." Please think of the response that you would give. What would you say? Don't worry. Well, I really thought they were to be come out one by one. Don't worry. This is something that we say very commonly, right? Does anybody stop worrying because we say don't worry? We don't deliberately worry. Next, please. There is nothing to be scared of. Of course, there's a lot to be scared of for that person. That doesn't calm the person down. Next. Hold on to this image and keep praying. Interestingly, I have come across this a lot. That I tell you, I just sit down and listen to people's stories. That has enriched my lives. These stories. Somebody said he was given a cross and asked to keep it under the pillow. He said it felt like something burning under his pillow. He could not sleep through the night. I have had image of Lord Ganesha, a picture of Arjun. I have seen Sai Baba's Vibhuti. All these causing intense suffering for the person who belongs to another faith. That a Muslim woman accepted the Vibhuti in her hand because it was a kind person giving it. And the whole family was scolding her. So you have committed a sin, they said. So imposing one's own faith or on somebody else, imposing your own personal convictions and asking people to pray. If they wanted to pray, they would pray themselves, right? Next, please. Really, only 1 in 1,000 patients get serious complications with anesthesia. This was what a doctor told one of the patients. And she says, 1 in 1,000, what if I am in 1 in 1,000? Actually, it is not 1 in 1,000. The data show that it is 6 in 1,000 actually, serious adverse events with anesthesia, but leave that alone. Even if we say 1 in 10,000, for that person in that frame of mind, facing an operation, that's not comforting. Next, please. Don't you trust doctors? Next, please. Trust in God. That's a very, very common one. Well, that person has his own or her own faith belief system. And if that trust in God was enough, she wouldn't need help. And actually, sometimes, not in the context of anesthesia, a patient with cancer, when told, trust in God, the impression that he got was, doctors cannot help me anymore. So, I am saying that none of these is a very useful response to the question, to the statement, I am scared. Then what do we do is what I'm going to talk about. Next, please. If somebody says, I'm scared, I wouldn't continue to stand. I would sit down. That act of sitting down beside a patient, which in pre-anesthetic rounds, I would consider very important. Unfortunately, during pre-anesthetic rounds, after the end of a long day, we are all tired. We would be hurrying to get home eventually at the late evening. But if we are spending just 1 minute, I think it makes a lot of sense to sit down and I establish eye contact with the patient, because by that act, you are telling the person, this time is for you. I am here for you. And when I say listen to what is not said, what I mean is the body language, the language of the eyes. And if the person seems afraid, scared, acknowledge that suffering. I see that you are afraid of, I see that you are scared. Tell me, what are you scared of? And if the person says, I am allergic to pain, they may be saying as if it is a joke. Acknowledge it. People have a right to be different. They don't have to be able to put up with as much pain as I need to. I can. Next, please. Sorry, Vinil, will you go back once more? Now, you are all scientists. deal with so much of chemistry and physics and deep, profound knowledge about physiology. I am not talking a lot of science, I know. I mean, most of this is scientifically proved things about how to communicate. Nevertheless, these are common things. So here, before I move on, I'll still emphasize two things. Sitting down, even if it's only for 30 seconds. Acknowledging what the person says. If the person says, I am scared, I see that you are afraid. Tell me more. What are you scared of? Don't assume that they are scared of operation or dying or something. Sometimes what they may say is, I am scared that before my operation, my husband will not get here. And all your lectures would be useless unless somebody rings up that husband and makes the arrangement. Or I am scared of pain. And then we'll be able to give the right reassurance. So that's the first step, acknowledging suffering. Next, please. Make sure that we give them the responses that they are asking for. The question may be, Dr. Will I wake up? I've heard that sometimes people do not wake up after anesthesia. This is the once in a way, once in 4 years, they read up in a newspaper, it is stuck to the mind, that's their worry. And quoting statistics doesn't help. If you say it's only 1 in 10,000, coma following anesthesia, that doesn't reassure the person because that's the frame of mind. I am sure we will have to give what the patient wants to know in common language. Unfortunately, very often we end up giving them jargon, our own words. Like, you haven't eaten, have you? We don't want to be. I see that you have GERD. What does a patient know what's the GERD? We use technical terms. So whatever we tell them will have to be in common language. Everything that I tell them, after that, what did you understand? Would you like to tell me what you understood? And especially in those people who are particularly worried, this is very important to clarify. What the patient wants to know, I'll give honestly. I will not tell lies. But I will not use the truth in a blunt way. I mean, just giving the facts all of a sudden like a bombshell is also very harmful. As much as they are willing to hear, I will have to give them. If they are saying that I am scared about pain following the operation, what can we tell them? Leave the pain, and what we will say is, I will put in an epidural catheter. So that's a device that will be put into the by your back. That will make sure that you will have pain relief following surgery. I am going to be here for you. I am going to care for you all through your operation. What's the harm in saying that? When we say that, immediately they say, okay, somebody cares for me. I'm sure all of us go to hospitals where we know some people. I'll go to that hospital where Giri is or Binil is because I know Nasser will look after me well. I'll happily go to Nasser's hospital. That's the connection we have. And people need that connection. So just giving the confirmation that I will care for you, that will be a great positive step. And always, always keep promises. I mean, we cannot do the impossible. And the person will say, doctor, will you come and see me tomorrow morning? Because you have been kind to that person. If we cannot go tomorrow morning, we shouldn't say yes. Because that person will be counting on you. And then if we don't fulfill the promise, they will feel abandoned and trust will be completely lost. Next, please. So I don't know whether that leaves time for any discussions, and I would stop there. And if there is time, I'd be happy to get your comments or answer your questions.
Very nice presentation, sir. Rajgopal, sir.
Oh, Garu, thank you.
Sir. So, how do you handle this terminally ill patient with malignancy? We know that he is going to die in few weeks or few days, and I'll be discussing with mostly with the attendants of that particular patient rather than with the patient directly. And is there any special approach?
Dr. Rao, I was thinking what I would like if I am the patient. Someday I'll have to die of something. And who knows, it could be cancer. And if I am lying there, wondering whether I am going to die soon, I'll be anxious about it, right? Wouldn't I want to know the truth? Because I have things to do. I want to do some things, make some arrangements. And if I really want to know, I believe you have the duty to tell me. And you can think of yourself. If you are ill, would you want to be given the diagnosis or would you like it to be concealed? Secondly, if I am not given the truth, I will know you are hiding something, right? It will be obvious. You will say everything is okay, but you will not be giving me a proper diagnosis, or you will be giving me a wrong diagnosis. You will be saying it's a gastric ulcer. That will be even more harmful, because then I am not finishing my unfinished business. So what do you do? First, I will confirm that he really wants to know and is ready to know. He may not be ready to hear the truth. He may be just waiting to hear that is okay. So I'll say, okay, what exactly is your question? Why did you ask that question? And if I get the impression that he really wants to know, I will give it in steps. The first step will be to give a warning shot. I'm sorry, it's not very good news. That warning shot will prepare him, but I'll also be able to see from his expression whether he wants to proceed with the conversation. Sometimes they switch off and just indicate that they don't want to continue the conversation, but usually most of them would say, yes, I want to know. And I would say, look, would you like to tell me? Your face shows urgency. Why do you want to know? Why are you so anxious? Because they'll say, everybody is hiding something from me. And I really want to know. Because I do not know, I am very anxious. And then I'll say, Mr. So-and-so, unfortunately, it is a cancer. But this is a cancer that is a good chance to cure. Or if it's incurable, then I'll say, unfortunately, it is a cancer. But we assure you that we'll be with you and we'll be ready to take care of any suffering that you may have, like pain or anything else. We'll continue to care for you. The point is, when we give a bad news, we want to retain some hope. Without hope, there is no life. But the hope will have to be realistic. I'll have to tell them what is achievable. So the most positive point has to be given immediately after the bad news. You have cancer, but we will keep you comfortable. If, I mean, in my institution, we have one possibility. We have a 24-hour helpline. So we tell them, you can call at any time. If you need to be in hospital, we'll admit you if that is necessary. So we will give promises that we can keep, and that will be the way of instilling that hope. There are a couple of chat questions. One from Dr. Anil Parag. We all try to be sympathetic with the patient, but once in a while there is a patient who, in spite of our best efforts, are not convinced, and we have to be a bit rude or angry. How to handle such situation? The first part, whatever we do, all good intentions, and we do our best, and some people continue to be unhappy. Common, not very uncommon. It happens. It happens just as there are abnormal reactions to medicines, there are abnormal reactions to human interactions also. We have to be a bit rude or angry. I know that when you are rude or angry, they subside very often. Very often. I usually find that that's the time when the anger is escalated. Because when we respond in anger, they retaliate in anger. It's like a very angry game of tennis. Rather than that, I also have this problem. When somebody is angry with me, I also get angry. But if it is with a patient, I'll try to contain my anger and say, I gave you an explanation. Obviously, you are not happy with my explanation. Would you like to see another doctor? Because I do not know how to handle this situation. I will not retaliate in anger, but I'll give them plain facts and I'll offer to withdraw from the scene. Have you, from Dr. Sumant, have you had ever instances where the patient was deliberately playing up nice before surgery, later started throwing a fit because he or she can get their way for multiple reasons, most common so that fees cannot be paid? Doctor, I have never really worked long enough in a corporate hospital, so some of your experiences will be very unfamiliar to me. Now, this I know is happening. Today, this lack of trust between hospitals and people are much more than 10 years back. The lack of trust is growing, and there is another aspect of it. Catastrophic health expenditure is also growing. There was a paper published in British Medical Journal by 3 Indian authors in 2018, which says 55 million Indians are pushed below poverty line in 1 year because of health expenditure. And when that happens, all my conversations become meaningless. We doctors are taking a tiny part of that. Most of it is vanishing into some powers that we do not see. And you and I are facing the patient. Those who take most of that money are not facing that patient. We are there. We get beaten up. This is what's happening right now. So, yes, when we teach communication skills, we also teach management of anger, how to handle an angry person, like making them sitting down. Very often, a person who stands is more likely to attack physically. Make the person sit down. Do not start with your explanation. Allow them to speak. Try to contain one's own anger. Let them finish the talk and then respond. But that also will not work if they are deliberately coming to attack you so that they can get away without paying a fee. So how to handle the person who uh, is angry with you because they don't want to pay a fee? I suppose there will be the HR manager there who will have to handle that, but you are taking me beyond my area of expertise, clearly. The problem increases if it is a small child. This is from, the name is not clear. A small child with a cancer, bad prognosis, parents keep seeing you as a savior. Some even think an MRI is part of the treatment. And yes, big problem. This is so much more difficult than an adult patient because the parents are so protective. Repeated sessions are usually necessary, and in the most of the time we are able to get the family to acceptance, but I'll accept that doesn't always work, and sometimes we have no option except to get them to see another oncologist and another oncologist and another oncologist. And sometimes some of them may be sort of emotionally blackmailed into giving more chemotherapy, making the child more suffer. But I accept that this is a difficult issue. But I can understand it. If it was my own child, how would I have tackled? And I hope, I don't know if that person is here, an anesthetist who worked so closely with me, who went through that. And even on the last stage of treatment, I remember sitting in my home, I remember he crying, I cannot give up my son. He went on repeating, I cannot give up my son. So that's an understandable thing. All that I can do is to continue to work with them, not abandon them. I see that there are many more questions here. I also have the feeling that I have far exceeded the time given to me. So if Binil, you can copy the chats and email them to me, I'll prepare a response to all those things and email them to me so that you can give it out to every participant. Or if you want me to continue, I can, but I see that I have exceeded time far, way too far.
That is a good idea, sir. What you said is correct. We will follow like that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the excellent talk. There are so many people
Thank you.
waiting for so many questions. And thank you very much. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Nader, sir. Hello?
Sir,
Hello? Dr. Nader, sir, shall we move on to second topic?
Yes, sir, you can move on, sir. He's muted, that's why. We can
Okay.
move on to next one.
Now I invite Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya, who is a well-known personality. He is a regular speaker in almost all the state, national, regional, all conferences. And he is a professor at Kasturba Medical College, Mangalore. His areas of interest are in obstetric anesthesia, difficult airway, where he has given many lectures on this. He delivered more than 200 lectures at various levels, and he has given Venkatrao the most prestigious Venkatrao Oration in 2018. And he trained 25,000 people in PLS and first aid. And he is an editorial member of IJA and also in Karnataka Journal. He is a member of Obstetric Committee of World Federation of Society of Anesthesiologists from 2016 to 20. And he worked as a medical superintendent KMC Hospital also. He held many posts of Secretary of ISA Karnataka, President, Vice President South Zone of ISA, member of Obstetric Committee, and also as an organizing secretary of many conferences. And he conducted PG Excel programs also. And IMA and worked as secretary IMA also, has been active Rotarian, contributed to many public programs. And I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya, and his topic is on safety in anesthesia practice, which is a very useful topic for everyone. Now I request Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya to deliver his lecture.
Thank you
Over
very
to
much, Dr. Kameshwar Garu. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. That was a little too detailed an introduction. Yeah, good evening, friends. I think Venkatrao oration, I think I delivered in 2018 in Nagra, and a year before that, Professor Rajgopal delivered the oration. And here too, I think I'm following Professor Rajgopal. But fountainhead of knowledge, Dr. Rajgopal, and after that, it is a little difficult to maybe talk. Am I audible to everyone? Is there any disturbance?
No, sir. You are audible, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this is another topic which I really love, the safety in anesthesia. I think I have been training the postgraduates over the last 28, 30, 29 years. And only thing I teach them is how to be a safe anesthesiologist rather than a hero or do heroics. I think we all have to be safe anesthesiologists. And mostly if you try to be a safe anesthesiologist, I think you can avoid a lot of mishaps. And you think about safety and you avoid the mishaps. I think that is the way forward, because Professor Rajgopal also talked about agitated patients and relatives. I think in this corporate era, as long as you are safe and as long as you communicate well to the patient and the patient's relatives, I think we are safe. Therefore, I don't know how long I have for this. It's a pretty long presentation. Whenever people say I have to stop, I think I will stop. Why? Yeah. Basically, we'll start off with wondering what is safe anesthesia, safety in anesthesia. We all know that it is, to err is human, and we are all human, basically. But the mistakes what we do as anesthetists, anesthesiologists, and it's not taken very lightly by the surgeons, by the management, or by the patients themselves. Therefore, we have to be, as I said, we have to be absolutely safe. When you talk about the safety, what do you look at? Are you looking at the safety of the patient, or are you looking at the safety of the anesthetist? Which one is safe? I think basically our approach is patient-centric. Therefore, you have to look at the safety of the patient first. And if your patient is safe, obviously we are all safe. We are safe anesthesiologists. The surgeon is safe, and actually the entire system will be safe. But to err is human, but convincing the people that erring is human is pretty difficult nowadays. You can't afford to make a mistake, all right? And no blunders at all. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what we are capable of. As anesthesiologists, I think we are everywhere. From the emergency till the critical care, anesthesiologists rule the roost. Therefore, I think we are everywhere. And we have to be an expert right now in evidence-based practice of the perioperative issues. When we call ourselves perioperative physicians, I think it is time that we look at the perioperative issues are managed evidence-based. You can't say, I have 30 years of experience, I would like to do it like this. Gone are the days. You have to show evidence. And the current trends, you can't hang on to halothane even today. You can't hang on to succinylcholine today. I think time has come for us to change our practices and move forward. And the newer drugs are much safer than what we have used when we were postgraduates. I think we have to look at all that. And ultimately, you are the boss when it comes to talking about OR safety and the quality care. You are in charge of the quality issues of the OR. And management wise, an anesthesiologist is always considered the best when it comes to the management. Therefore, I think we totally, instead of just calling ourselves perioperative physicians, I think we are the total physicians in the hospital. I think time has come for us to be the leaders, and we have to be there when the hospital or the administration needs us. We all agree that it is a high risk specialty, anesthesiology. I don't have to tell the experts in the field that it's a balanced life. We have to be worried about taking the patient to the precipice of death and then bring them back to life. We have been doing it basically. Therefore, let's not forget that it is a high risk field compared to any other specialty. And we have been handling the life and the death too. 1970s, we talked about one death per 5,000 anesthetics. And then when we did the post-graduation in 1990s, early 90s, we were talking about a death in 10,000 patients or anesthetics. But now we are talking about one death in 1 million or more patients, especially when the surgical patients are sicker and they're aged than ever because the life expectancy has gone up and the awareness of the health, about the health, has really gone up. And we don't deal with the death that frequently. And again, it's again because we have been practicing safe anesthesia. The mortality basically, as per this study, NACO, the mortality hasn't come down much over the last decade or so, but the complications rates have dropped by more than half in the last 4 years. Again, there are a lot of issues contributed to the safe practices. I will talk about that as I go by, all right, over the last maybe the next 45 minutes or so. Most of the, unfortunately, most of the errors are the medication errors. And I think that is where we have to focus a little more, and we have to reduce the medication errors, and so that the patients remain much more safer. And what could be the complications? I don't have to list them out. Cardiac arrest tops it all. And then it can be anything which is listed out there, perioperative MIs to aspiration to anaphylaxis to goes on. And the minor complications could be airway obstructions, post-op nausea, vomiting, sore throat, sedation, excessive sedation, delirium is an issue, cognitive defects, and anything can happen. Shivering, the patients can be very uncomfortable when they start shivering continuously in the post-operative period. And a little bit on what could be the causes of cardiac arrest, because that is one of the most fatal eventualities of anesthetics. It can be a drug overdose or adverse reaction, and rhythm disturbances, perioperative MIs, airway obstruction, high spinals. And what I would like to stress on is the lack of vigilance. You cannot be less vigilant when you anesthetize and when you monitor the patient, when the patient has trusted you for his or her safety. Lack of vigilance should never be a cause of anesthetic death. And bleeding could be, and it could be overdose of inhalational agents. When you have a good RGM, this cannot be a reason. And aspiration and technical problem in anesthesia system, as they say, when technology is the master, disaster comes faster. Obviously, if your anesthesia delivery system, if it is not perfectly all right, you can still have problems with patient outcomes. Keep them all in mind. And again, I would like to stress that in 2000, the mortality was 1 in 300,000 anesthetics, but now it is more than 1 million, 1 in 1 million anesthetics. But why should we be worried about safe anesthesia? Please, if there is any postgraduate, please remember that the patient does not come to the hospital for anesthesia per se. He comes for a diagnostic procedure, he comes for a surgical procedure or a curative procedure. And anesthesia is only to make the patient comfortable while he is at the diagnostic chambers or he is on the surgery table. Therefore, the anesthesia cannot kill a patient. We have to be absolutely safe when the patient trusts you and he's on the table for anesthesia and surgery or diagnostics, right? How do we compare with other industries and high risk situations? Obviously, from the day you joined anesthesia, seniors have drilled into you that anesthesia is likened to an airplane taking off and landing. And it's absolutely true. And anesthesia induction and the reversal is surely very, very high risk situations. And how do we compare with the airline industry or the road traffic accidents? Obviously, the moment you are born, you start moving on the streets, globalization, the road traffic accidents have become absolutely common. But road traffic accidents consume about 18 lives per 100,000 people per year, whereas mortality from GA is 1 in 300,000, or as I said, it has changed. This is 2013 data, 2020 is more than a million. And you can say that a patient has a higher chance of dying from RTA rather than from the exposure to the general anesthetic. And as I said, the aviation industry, we have taken a lot of cues from aviation industry, because aviation industry and the nuclear medicine, they are nuclear industry. They are the two places where there is stringent safety protocols. And I think we have derived a lot of points from these two industries. And we compare ourselves to the aviation industry. Safety of the airline travel is one of the highest. And though there has been an increase in the air traffic density, still there are more takeoffs and landings, but less separation between the aircrafts, just the way we manage our patients. But still, the fatalities associated with the airline travel has been kept to the minimum, so too the anesthesia management of a patient. I think we have, as I said, derived a lot of points from the aviation industry to be safer. There is still a major difference between the healthcare versus the aviation. Basically, in anesthesia, when you provide anesthesia, the anesthesiologist or the pilot is outside. He does not suffer the loss if something happens to the patient outcomes. Whereas in an aircraft, the pilot has to meet his doom if something happens to the flight he is flying. There's a major difference, but as long as you also consider that it's a life which you are handling, I think we will all be very safe when we anesthetize. Similarities between aviation and healthcare is both are complex and inherently hazardous. There's an exacting performance requirement between both the industries, but the differences could be higher preventable incident rates, and most incidents are less visible in medicine or in anesthesia. Errors often go undetected. Basically, I need not stress on this. We have this poor record of announcing the adverse events we face, even the mortalities we face. We suffer, we don't disclose them. There's some level of resistance from a professional to disclose the mortalities, disclose the adverse events. So much so that when I was the head of the department, we decided to have a register for adverse events and register for mortalities, because that is one of the requirements of the Medical Council of India. And there were some days when I believed that it was only me who has had events. There was nobody else who had events, because you have to come out and announce them. Unless you tell the world will not learn from our mistakes. We have to make sure that everybody gains some knowledge out of our mistakes. I think the errors have to be announced. Professional interactions are not standardized. In air industry, there is absolutely no way you're going to hide the mistakes, the errors. They are recorded and they are announced. But here we can hide under the protective umbrella, and we should not do that, basically. Okay. Basically, what they do is there is something called Aviation Safety Reporting System. It is funded by the Federal Aviation Agency, and it is administered by none other than NASA. And it focuses basically on prevention. So too our business now. we also look at the prevention rather than curing or treating a complication. And obviously, as I said, you can't hide, and everything is discussed, it is in the open. And the reports are mostly submitted voluntarily because they're trained to do it. And analysis and response, whether you're in healthcare or you're in aviation industry, both are key to improvement. Unless you have an inclination to improve your anesthesia practice and the anesthesia practice around you, it cannot change. You have to announce your failures, you have to announce your blunders. There is basically, after APSF came into being existence, there is raised awareness and culture of safety, and everybody abides by what Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation advocates. And I think they are the reasons why basically the awareness has gone up. And there is also technological advances. Obviously, in 1989, when I joined for a PG, the pulse oximeter was a luxury, and hand-on pulse was the way we used to monitor our patients. But now you have multi-para monitors, and pulse oximetry is a minimum mandatory monitoring, and therefore we don't have any issues about the technology involved in safe anesthesia practices. We have simulators. Whenever you have difficulties, you can go to the simulator, you can learn. There will be somebody who trains you in the technique, and I think you become a better practitioner of anesthesia. And there is direct benefit to the practitioners. I should not say this, but still the premium which you pay on your professional indemnity has come down massively. Even in India, you can get an insurance for about for 50 lakhs cover, you pay only about 13,500 or so. I think it has come down because we don't have those kind of mortalities as it used to be earlier. Obviously, the safe anesthesia practice will surely reflect on the premium what you pay to the insurance companies. What makes anesthesia safe? Being careful costs you nothing. Carelessness may cost you your life. Therefore, we are dealing with life, and I think we have to be extremely careful about what we do. As I said, what makes our anesthesia safe is monitoring equipments. There are ASA guidelines and ISA guidelines to have minimum mandatory monitoring, whatever setup you have on this face of this earth and on the face of this earth. And I think the monitoring standards have gone up and monitors have become safer. You have safer drugs. Obviously, when we had DTC or galamine, and now we use cisatracurium or etracurium or rocuronium, I think the relaxants have become safer, sedative hypnotics have become safer. The narcotics are much safer now than you can always abuse a drug like morphine or pethidine, and now you have shorter acting drugs. You are much safer now. There are advances in airway management. The maximum I tried was maybe blind nasal intubation, but now nobody talks about blind nasal intubation as a technique. With the straightaway, the gold standard has become fibroscopy. I think that is something which has been saving lives. And skill, knowledge, and application, obviously the spurt in the CMEs, workshops, conferences, simulation labs. Obviously, we improve, hone our skills, and the knowledge explosion has happened, and you can get everything at the fingertips, and then you can learn more and easily. Even inside the theater, you can learn a lot, and you can apply your skill and knowledge to the patient safety. Therefore, your patient will be absolutely safer in your hands. And then we seriously talk about evidence-based medicine, and you have guidelines and protocols. Most of your departments obviously will have their own protocols, and associations like Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, ISCCM, they have been coming out with the guidelines, and IDA has come out with wonderful guidelines for difficult airway management. I think they teach you how to be safe. You learn them, you practice them, I think you will be. And obviously the surgical skills, initially we know that surgery improved because of improvement in anesthesia, but now they're expanding vastly. Maybe it is laparoscopic surgery or robotic surgery, but we are up there, and surgical skills have improved. They're making it safer. we never had given anesthesia for a thyroidectomy without blood arranged. But now we hardly use blood intraoperatively. Therefore, surgical skills have improved, and that also has improved, reduced the morbidity and mortality in the patients. I think all in all, the technology, the safer drugs, and monitoring has made our life much, much safer. And what are the factors which might influence your risk of anesthesia? The first thing is patient status. As I said, you get sicker patients and more older patients. They come with a lot of comorbidities. Therefore, obviously, the risk of anesthesia goes up. And procedures, more invasive surgeries are being done, and urgency in the surgeries have gone up. Emergent surgeries are mostly done now compared to earlier. And the facilities, if you have the resources, the equipment, and monitoring, obviously you will be feeling much safer. If the management does not provide you with any of the facilities, then you have to be wondering where to hide. Skill and expertise, I just talked about it. And then the most important thing is the readiness. How ready are you? Once you get fatigued, you should not continue to anesthetize. You should take a break and allow somebody else to step in. The fatigued anesthetist means disaster for the patient safety, Therefore, fatigue is absolutely important, right? What is patient safety? Basically, the absence of the potential for patient harm. It involves all the healthcare providers. There's no shortcut to safety, and everyone, starting from the housekeeping to the nursing to the doctors, and even if you have management people, they also are a part of patient safety. It involves all the departments, and there is no break there are no off hours for safety. It is 24/7. All right. Anesthesia today is quite safe, and it has been basically because of advances in pharmacology, technology, and more stringent practice standards. That I need not repeat that, but I think it's worth remembering again and again. All right. What are the causes of anesthesia-related mishaps? You should know the mishaps to avoid them. You should know the complications to avoid them. Therefore, what could be the causes of anesthesia-related mishaps? The first thing is judgment errors. You have to be awake. You have to be, even if you are absolutely caffeine-driven, I think you have to be at your best to manage patient under anesthesia, patient's anesthesia. The medication errors, we'll talk about that in a little more detail a little later. Medication errors have been killing more patients than ever. And if you don't have, as I said, if you don't have resuscitative equipments, monitoring, and post-operative management facilities, obviously there could be more mishaps than technical mishaps is something which should be avoided. But as I said, few things may not be under your control unless you have the best of the biomedical engineers at your disposal. Aspiration, wrong choice of patients, and hypoxic mixtures, it should not happen, because the patients, any patient who you have now, you have to make your anesthesia to suit your patient rather than you try to fit in your patient's physical condition into your anesthesia technique. Hypoxic mixture should not happen in this time of life. How do you prevent them? Prevent the mishaps. First thing is pre-anesthetic preparation. Spend a lot of time with your patient, looking at the chart, looking at the patient, and make sure that everything is in order. You know what your patient is. You know what is happening to the patient pre-operatively, so that in perioperatively you can be handling them the best. Vigilance, eternal vigilance. ISA has taught us eternal vigilance. I think you have to be vigilant at all times. Even for a moment, you cannot take a break, because, as I said, safety does not have any breaks. Monitoring, continuous monitoring is needed in the perioperative period, not only the intraoperative period. And pick up the safer anesthetics and the adjuvant drugs if you have an iota of doubt that that particular drug may not suit this patient. Never ever use them. There is a saying that any drug is safe in safe hands, but still don't try any heroics. Use the safer anesthetic choice drug. Better education and training. I think this is where we have to be. When medical council wanted us to train ourselves, attend CMEs, and have uh, credit hours at our disposal, and then re-register, there were people who were against it. For one, even if I'm encountering controversies, I think I'm okay with that, because unless you keep up with the pace in medicine, you will be left behind, and it should not be happening. Quality assurance is something which every college, whether it is a government college or a government hospital or a private hospital, they are looking at the quality part. I think we have to be up there to manage and help them out. Few things on anatomy of errors. I will just take you through two scenarios, and one of them is 53-year-old male with a history of diabetes, stroke, drug-resistant staph aureus, infections and leg ulcers and heart failure. He was admitted for treatment of bilateral leg ulcerations and cellulitis. He was unresponsive to the treatment, and the surgeon decides that the patient developed distal ischemia, and it was worse in the right lower extremity, and there was gangrene setting in the right lower extremity, and the surgery was scheduled. The surgery was below-knee amputation on the right side, obviously, because as it said, the right side was worse than the left side. And what are the precautions you take? You have to mark the side. Unless you mark the side, you cannot go into surgery. And during the preparation, the surgeon marked the right lower extremity with an X with indelible ink. But unfortunately, at the time of surgery, the mistake was the right leg was covered and the left leg was draped for surgery. And the surgeon thought he had marked the appropriate limb preoperatively, but he did not find the X on the left lower limb, and the right limb was covered. Therefore, he proceeded with the below-knee amputation of the left lower leg. What do you do? Error was discovered post-operatively, and the patient underwent a below-knee amputation of the right leg because the right leg, there is gangrene setting in already. So the patient became a double amputee. What really went wrong? Actually, you can circumvent these problems if you are a little more vigilant, and if there are checks at every level, starting from the ward of the patient till intraoperative periods. We'll see what can be done a little later. Scenario number 2 is, I had this. There were two patients with identical first names and initials. They were scheduled for surgery at the same time, on the same date, in the same OT complex. One was for a double valve replacement and the other for a urethral dilatation. And the latter was rushed to the CTVS OR and then anesthetized. The former was taken to the urology OT and readied for the spinal anesthetic. Suddenly, the attending anesthetist walks in. The patient was getting readied for a spinal anesthetic, but the attending anesthetist saw an abnormal rhythm on the ECG monitor, and the inquiry and recheck of the patient's identity showed the switch. Actually, the double valve lady was on the urology table, and the urology patient had ended up on the CTVS table. And they were immediately alerted, by which time the urology patient had received invasive femoral catheterization, arterial catheterization, and the patients were shifted to the right wards for the correct procedure. But wonder what would have gone through the patient who entered the CTVS OT and she saw what was happening around. What really went wrong? We have a kind of a foolproof system where these things are not expected to happen, but it happened. What really went wrong? We'll see. These things are to be avoided. You are reminded of the wrong-sided tendon repair which happened in one of the corporate hospitals in Delhi. Why should it happen? How can we avoid them? I think Dr. Kameshwar or Binil can stop me whenever I should.
You can extend for 5 more minutes, sir.
Only every accident is a notice that something is wrong with men, methods, or material. Investigate and then act. Obviously, you have to go through all this. When you have a sentinel event, you look at the root cause. Unless you look at the root cause, it's not going to help you, right? The causes for perioperative errors could be lack of dedicated emergency theaters, lack of adequate post-operative recovery and intensive care bed provision, lack of staff, or inappropriate nighttime operating by unsupervised junior or locum doctors. We see the postgraduates or junior faculty who want to cut through the night. They post cases which need not be operated at that time. Inadequate preparation for the emergency patients. That could be excessive fluid administration and so on. Therefore, don't compromise on any of these things, including the non-invasive monitoring, which has to be done at all times, right? Adverse events, you have to look at the adverse events and the preventable adverse events and then the errors. The preventable adverse events are something which you have to focus on and you should be avoiding them. Adverse event is nothing but an injury caused by a medical management, and the error is failure of planned action to be completed as intended or use of a wrong plan to achieve an aim. You have to prevent any of this, basically. All right. What could be the pathophysiology of errors? The human factors, basically slips and lapses like triggered by interruptions, fatigue, time pressures, anger, anxiety, fear, boredom. Mention anything which affects your mentation can obviously harm the patients. Therefore, you have to be extremely careful. Mistakes could result from a wrong plan of action, involve misinterpretation of a problem, lack of knowledge, habitual patterns of thought. You go in the same track all the time, you don't deviate and keep on making the same mistakes, which you should not be, right? The sharp end is something which you have to be worried about, because the sharp end is where the patient interacts with the practitioners. You, anesthesiologist, has to encounter the patient at the sharp end. And the blunt end basically is your management, and it could be regulations. And they also provide a broader base for your patient safety. But still, the practitioners and the patient interaction, which happens at the sharp end, is something which is going to determine how your patient is going to fare in the system. And James Reason is the one who talked about the Swiss cheese model when it came to, obviously everybody knows about all this, the defense and the failures. And actually the holes in a Swiss cheese, they are of different shapes and different sizes, and they're at different areas. And if there is an alignment, like we'll say there is a wrong prescription given or a right prescription given. The first defense is a distracted nurse. There is lack of staffing, therefore she is stressed and she doesn't see much. She just sends it to the pharmacy. And the second defense is the pharmacy, there is no treatment tracking, therefore they prescribe whatever has been, they issue whatever has been prescribed. And the third defense, if the nurse is vigilant, there is no failure. If there is understaffing, and if that too comes in line with the other holes, other lacunae, then it is a sure shot disaster. Therefore, Swiss cheese model is the most important aspect of our safety, right? The standardized approaches can reduce variability and improve the system efficiency. Therefore, make sure that everyone, including the first defense and the last defense, everyone is perfectly in shape and they know what to do. All right. Life at the sharp end is always difficult, and it is you who should be stalling any of the mistakes which should not happen. Right. I think we know that I have talked about error reporting so that everybody learns from your mistakes, because one life is not enough to make mistakes and learn from them. Therefore, error reporting and analysis has to happen. at the department level, at the hospital level. And the root cause analysis, obviously, if you report them, root cause analysis will happen and it has to be done. Then finally make sure that safety improvement initiatives are inculcated in every person who is associated with the patient safety or the patient outcomes, right? The reporting systems can be absolutely complex and it could be duplicative, but your quality initiatives demand that you have to report any adverse event which happens in the OR or in the perioperative period. I think the onus is on us to be a little honest and then announce them. Root cause analysis, I need not tell you what exactly to do it. You do, and all this, what happened to, why did it happen, and under what circumstances, and then you have to also talk about risk reduction strategies, action plan to prevent recurrence. Every mistake what you do, you should make sure that it's not repeated by you, it is not repeated by in the system. All right, error reporting alone is not enough, because the moment why we don't do basically the reporting is because we believe that individual as an individual will be blamed most of the times, and there is a tendency to focus on the individuals. It is not the department, it's not the unit which is blamed, it's only that person who is blamed. And when you are at the sharp end, obviously everybody who gets smarter after the event, obviously hindsight bias is always there. We always become much smarter after the event. It should have been like that, but believe me, when you are facing the problems, you are alone facing the problems. And don't swat the mosquitoes. Each mosquito you can't catch and swat them. You have to drain the swamp if you want to be safe, if you want to have better patient outcomes. All right. Complex systems harbor latent failures. And please remember that Murphy's law applies anywhere. If it has to happen, will happen. Murphy's law applies to anything in your life. Murphy's law applies. How do you design the systems for safety? You simplify the processes. You reduce the handoffs and make workplace user friendly. Everybody should feel comfortable when they are working in the system. Reduce the variation. You have protocols, you stick them onto your machines, onto the walls, and make sure that the guidelines are followed, protocols are followed. The variations, if they're reduced, the patient outcome does not suffer. You improve the communication. Everybody involved, like physicians, nurses, personal physician assistants, and pharmacists, if needed, patients and their families, everybody has to be included. Eleanor Everett is somebody who is associated with the patient safety, and she says, for safety is not a gadget, but a state of mind. We have to look at that, right? I will skip a few of them because it's going to be very late for your dinners. And what the Patient Safety Foundation recommends is you increase funding for research in patient safety and implementation science, address safety across the entire care continuum. It's a continuous process, and from the time the patient enters the hospital till the patient is discharged, I think we should look at the safety, whether it is structural changes or how we treat the patient, it has to change. Support the healthcare workforce, never give up on them. If they are in difficulty, the management has to support. Even the senior anesthesiologists have to support. Partner with patients and families for the safest care and ensure that the technology is safe and optimized to improve the patient safety, right? Technology has to be, it's not enough if you have the best of the technology. You also make sure that they're kept fit, have a good biomedical engineering team, and let them look into that. I'll skip this also. Obviously, the recording will be available to you. And otherwise, okay, what safe anesthesia practice? There should be appropriate education, adequate evaluation. That is something which is very important. I told you, I am for the evaluation once in a while. Re-registrations are perfectly all right because we have to update ourselves. Periodic updation is needed. Practice of protocols, crisis management, guidance from experts. Obviously, you have experts coming into your department, or the important guy in your department, the seniors, they can help you out and provide help when needed. Never run away from your responsibility and provide help. This is one of the best. You don't need to know the whole alphabet of safety. The ABC of it will save you if you follow. Always be careful, right? Always be careful, ABC. The protocols, I'm going to skip all of them because uh, I know that everybody has been using the WHO checklist and standard basic mandatory monitoring you have to do. And without that, don't anesthetize your patients. A small word about you as an anesthesiologist. You should, the anesthesiologist who administers anesthesia, he should be constantly present from induction to monitoring until safe transfer to PACU or ICU. Your job does not end till you hand over the patient to PACU, right? You are responsible for the overall anesthetic care of the patient. And these spelling mistakes are not mine, it is cut and paste. In exceptional circumstances, you delegate temporarily to an appropriately qualified person, and you should make sure that he is also competent to the task. What should you do is pre-anesthetic care, pre-anesthesia checks, and monitoring during anesthesia. Basically, you have a safe outcome. Again, to borrow a chain is only as strong as the weakest link is. I think that makes sense. Can't have any place for weaknesses. It has to be checklist. I told you, I'm not going to go into the details. You can download from the WHO website, and if any one of you haven't started doing it, make sure that you do it, right? Patient identity has to be confirmed at all times, and the site, procedure, everything, the WHO checklist will tell you what to do. Please follow them. Make sure that you have every resource at your disposal before you venture into anesthesia. There is no way you're going to compromise on what you have and what your patient needs. And make sure that the drugs are labeled. This is where the errors can be checked, right? Crash cart you have most of the times, all the times. And then drug should be clearly labeled with the strength. If you dilute phenylephrine from 100 mics per ml to 50 mics per ml, make sure that the label is in place before you start using the drug, right? Look-alike, sound-alike drugs are something. There are many companies which make different drugs which look alike. I think we will be in trouble, and high-risk drugs should be kept separately, and I need not stress on them. Medication, this is where we err most of the times. Before the skin incision, you involve everybody in the OR, and then please safety during anesthesia. No, I think I will skip a few. Vigilance, I told you, you have to be vigilant at all times. And if you have a resident trainee inside the theater, make sure that he or she is supervised by a consultant at all times. Shortcuts cut life short, therefore you cannot afford to do that, right? Even when the patient leaves, you do the sign out properly, and that is sure shot recipe for success. And there could be other concerns in the war, like electrical hazards and environmental hazards, including chemical dependency. You know what the ignition sources are, cautery or the surgical lights. Fuels are your oxygen and lubricants, and you have to know the fire plan, and you should have a plan. What will you do if a fire happens in the war, and where you vacate your patients and yourself, right? And you have to look at environmental safety inside the OR. If you have scavenging system, fair enough. Otherwise, you at least have wonderful lamina AC in the theater. Zoning is needed. I'm not going to talk about the zoning there. And the other important intra-op safety considerations are reducing the aspiration risk, restrictive or liberal fluid protocol. They are lessons in themselves. Rational use of blood. You have to prevent hypothermia, and hyperoxia or hypoxia management you have to do. When you transport the patient to the PACU, make sure there is basic minimum monitoring. Don't compromise on them. Don't say it is only 2 minutes from the OR table to the PACU bed. Don't take chances. You have to have well-defined discharge criteria. It's better if it is printed on the last page of your anesthesia chart, and you should do the discharge yourself from the PACU, right? Be a little more responsible, the residents or the consultants. Pain is something which you have to manage, and you have to be up there when it comes to vigilance. Education and training are a continual process. You have to continue with them, and you cannot take a break from education and updation. And documentation is something I need not stress on this. Documentation is going to save your day if there is a legal implication. Therefore, you make sure that the documentation is perfect from your side. And clinical audits have to happen in the department every now and then only the safety takes the priority. And peer review, don't be hesitant. Get somebody from outside your department to come and review the morbidities or mortalities in your department. It will give you an entirely different viewpoint, and I think you will be much wiser. Because when there are no stakes, the person involved will give you better inputs, and that will help you to grow better, right? Mortality and morbidity meets are needed as MCA demands them, and KPIs, I think, have to be incorporated. This is not going to save your day. I did it, I just forgot to write down. It's not going to save your day. Therefore, you have to make sure that you document everything. The patient survival depends on basically the safety, what you do, safety measures, what you take, and prepare and prevent. Don't repair and repent is something which has been spoken a million times, but I think we should be following them at all times. Please learn one or two alternate methods of an airway skill, and you practice it on routine cases. That will save you on a difficult day. All right. Monitoring, we all know what are the monitoring you plan. And now we are talking about opiate-free anesthesia and post-op pain management. I think you should be up there. If the patient does not need an opiate, you should look at using multimodal analgesia without opiates. Okay. And why opiate-free? I'm not going to talk about that. And it's a entire designated lecture. Post-op infection, obviously you have a role to play, but I think we can still manage without them. This is the last part of my topic. Crisis management is, anesthesiologist is very adept at doing it. I think an incident is just the tip of the iceberg, a sign of a much larger problem below the surface. The earlier you realize it, it's going to help you. You can refer to any of these documents, Australian Patient Safety Foundation documents, or you can also access the crisis management during anesthesia from qualitysafety.bmj.com. And as I said, the anesthesiologist is very good at managing the crisis, and you have to be prepared. You cannot let down yourself, you cannot let down your patients. And the algorithm is cover ABCD. I'm not going to go into the depth of this details. Cover, when you say COVER ABCD, cover stands for C stands for circulation and color of the patient. O stands for oxygen and oxygen analyzer. V stands for ventilation and vaporizer. E stands for endotracheal tube and elimination. Eliminate the anesthetic machine if you have issues and start bagging the patient. R1 is review monitors and review equipments. ABCD obviously is airway, breathing, circulation, and drugs. Right? Cover ABCD is something which you have to know. The last is after a crisis, how you manage the crisis is very, very important, because it makes or breaks the person who is involved. Situation, this is basically the S bar. You can Google this and get this from situation, the S bar maghc.org website. Situation, background, assessment, and recommendations. I think every event you have to do the S bar, and anyone who needs counseling whenever there is a complication. And I think the counseling part has to be done by a senior in the department or somebody else who is not. Last few lines. What are the recommendations for senior staff members? I know that most of the people who are here right now are seniors. Severe medical error is an emergency, and there has to be a confidence between the senior staff and the involved professional. And it's not that it's not going to hit you any day. It can hit anybody anytime, a disaster. Therefore, you make sure that you have an emotional support team, and it should be from the peers in their department or somebody from outside the department. Seniors should always offer support for the disclosing conversation with the patient and the relatives. Don't push the junior who is suffering already into the arena where there are hostile relatives or the patient's families. And a professional workup of that case based on the facts is important for analysis. And as I often said, to avoid such kind of event happening to you in your life. What do you do for your colleagues? Be aware that such an adverse event could happen to you also. Just because it has somebody else's house is on fire, it doesn't mean that my house will not catch fire. It can happen to me too. Therefore, you offer time to discuss the case with your colleague. Listen to what your colleague wants to tell and support him or her with your professional expertise. Address any culture of blame either directly from within the team or by any other colleagues. You will be a great help if you stand by your colleague. Recommendation for healthcare professionals directly involved in an adverse event. Do not suppress any feelings of emotion you may encounter after your involvement in a medical error. Talk through what has happened with a dependable colleague or senior member or staff. This is not weakness. This represents appropriate professional behavior. Take part in a formal debriefing session. Try to draw conclusions and learn from this event. If possible, talk to your patient, their relatives, and engage with them in open disclosure conversations. The moment you open up, the chances that when you are having frank discussions with your patients and relatives, the chances that they go for litigations is much, much lesser. The moment the relatives believe that you're trying to hide some info from them, the legal doors open, which should not happen. Okay. If you experience any uncertainties regarding the management of future cases, similar cases, seek support from colleagues or seniors. Don't venture all by yourself. You have had a complication with a patient a week ago. If you handle a similar patient now, you take help from others. There is nothing lost when you do it. Okay. Do no harm still stays, and safety is the system property. I think we have to be absolutely safe. All right. Safety first, because unless safe anesthesia is provided, safe surgery will not be possible and safety of the patient cannot be ensured. So safe anesthesia means safe surgery. It means safe patient. Ultimately, when you have a patient safe, you will be absolutely happy and comfortable. Thank you very much. Open for discussion if anybody has any issues.
Very nice presentation, Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyay.
Thank you, sir.
Nice. You have covered extensively. Almost there are no questions from the chat box.
No questions.
That means you are extensively covered.
No, that our teachers.
Hello. Dr. Joshi. Hello. Hello. You have covered very well, sir. Almost every aspect you have covered, and that's why there are no doubts in the chat box.
What's your forthright opinion on how work hours per week should be for an anesthetist? I think this is where we have been failing ourselves and failing our budding anesthesiologists. I think it is time we restrict the hours of work. The 36 hours and 48 hours of work for a postgraduate and a consultant has become the norm now. I think it is time to decide that, like in UK or the Western world, we also restrict the number of hours somebody puts in. I think that will be quite safe for us.
You're correct, sir.
Yeah,
You're correct.
that's it.
Sir, it's fantastic lectures on both Dr. Rajgopal sir and also Dr. Masood sir. It's fantastic, but both of you spoke about the human aspect and all those things. But in Rajgopal sir, what he said, it's more of a cult kind of thing, the personality that we have to groom all throughout, all the time. To always you feel for people who are with you. And as Dr. Masood sir said about that one, like what remuneration, what you want to get, why should be 30% of so-called surgeon's fees? That's a concern. The question here is, why should 30%? So why can't it be your own charges? You may take, for example, 10%, you may take 50%, depending on comorbid conditions or the risk what you're handling. So somewhere we are missing the link here, little bit. I'm not saying that the who started this cult of saying 30% of surgeon's fee should go to anesthetists. The risk, I don't know when it started and all those. I'm working on that one, looking into those things and all. But fine, for example, it could be you're taking almost a 50% responsibility, and then like maybe something like more common condition, it might be some other person might be doing a just for IND. It's a different story. But also one more thing I would like to stress to my colleagues, and of course it might be different in the institutions like maybe where the system runs like a patient comes to outpatient, all those things, especially people who are in the private sector and all those things. So which is surgeon you are handling or what is somewhere you need to have an eye about and all. You say, for example, why are they taking the rest of the professional fee is you have to understand. They say they own the patient. Am I right? They say it's inguinal hernia patient for spinal anesthesia. You come and give spinal anesthesia, and this is a fee and all those things. That means just because they own the patient, I mean, this is the private practice. What I would like to say from the 70% practice which is happening in India, especially people in institutions, they may not accept it, but the ground reality is same thing. Just because they own the patient, patient comes to them. Subsequently, it gets referred to you. So that's where they look at it. Just imagine if you can strengthen your own pain clinic critical care, you start referring patients to them. You come and see my patient, because you have to keep on understanding that one. You have to understand what I'm trying to say. Body language is. You need to take out. That's what they said in the Hindi. टेढ़ा उंगली से घी निकाला जाता है. You can always take out ghee with a bent one. So question here is, if they are playing that game with you, I'm not saying that institution might
Your voice is breaking, Dr. Joshi.
There's some network problem. Joshi sir,
some network problem.
But 70% of the institute sector, which is fair enough, which you respect. I'm sorry. Then you can continue, sir. Is it okay now?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay now.
So only one thing I said.
Sir.
I would like to say, because that's what I have been doing for last 25 years, is you start owning your patient. Then see the change. Start owning your patient. Even anesthesia person also doesn't matter and all. The pre-op what you see, post-op you go and see, establish rapport and all those things, and you see how the network develops and all those things. Subsequently they'll say, sir, I want tonsillectomy and all those things. And if Dr. Masood Upadhyay is going to be the anesthetist, I'll come to that hospital. If he's not coming there, okay, I'll go to other hospital wherever he's coming. Yeah. Is the subtle change in our confidence we have to modify. That will only happen. Your surgeon sees the patient pre-op, intra-op, post-op. If you see patient pre-op, intra-op, and also post-op and establish rapport, we are not trying to deviate the practice, but understand the culture culture and a cult. It's called as cult. Follow the patient pre-op, intra-op, post-op, and you say, then they should say, wherever Dr. Matsun Upadhyay is there as anesthetist, I will come and get my inguinal hernia done. That is the way system works. So thank you so much.
Correct.
I'm stopping here.
You are correct. Sir, I think there are no more questions.
Any comments from the seniors, sir? Any comments from the seniors who are sitting with us? Seniors, any comments?
Sir, this percentage system is there even internationally, even in US and UK also. This percentage fee for the anesthetist is existing. That is there everywhere.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes,
sir.
please.
Yeah, hello, good evening. As usual, Kerala is doing a fantastic job of having so many webinars. And
Pankaj?
hello, sir. Yes, sir. Pankaj, yes, sir.
अरे आवाज से पहचान लेते हैं यार, आगे बढ़ो.
Thank you, sir. I was hearing your comment. Your comment, sir. Actually, I feel time has come when ISA has to, each city branch has to lay down their minimum charges in whatever way they can do it. It's very difficult for us to start our OPDs and start getting patients, sir. And of course, before as our PPF guidelines say, we have to do our homework properly. Start doing, as you said, PAC, intra, post-op care, so that we are bothered about the patient, and then the surgeons start paying you automatically much more. I mean, this is what I've done in my practice, sir. I mean, I'm very happy as an anesthetist. I am paid much more than anyone else in the city. But then I feel I'm just working towards it. So I feel this basic minimum standards are being followed now in most places. Minimum charges have to be fixed in every city. That is important, sir. That will probably improve things a little. Especially because when juniors come into the city, they start compromising on the charges, and that's where our problems start.
Correct. You are correct.
So something has to be done for that, sir. Every city should lay down minimum charges. Maximum can be anything.
No.
And that's why here in Nasik we could do something better, sir. We laid minimum charges, and we were all getting it.
Nasik, you are doing a great job, sir.
Yes, sir,
I tell many people as an example of your branch.
Yes, sir. But we want this to be done everywhere in the country, sir. And I feel ISA is definitely doing a well.
Pankaj, let me tell you. Your patient Nasik tell me, sir, if Dr. Pankaj cannot do in Nasik, दुनिया में कहीं भी नहीं हो सकता है. You understand? If Pankaj cannot go do the case in Nasik, that case cannot be done anywhere else. That is the brand what you have done. The question is the cult you have to continue.
Exactly, sir. I mean, you have to lay your own standards.
No, not a junior seniors. Question is that could be because your VCP pre-op and intra post-op. That cult has to continue. The cult has to continue. Culture has to continue.
Exactly, sir.
It cannot be that somebody drapes the back and all, they just go and put a needle there, CSF comes in, push it up, get out. That won't help. See, the problem is anesthetists get easy money initial part of the year.
Exactly, sir.
The problem is, without any effort, you get easy money in the first 3 years.
Sir, I feel very proud to tell you, sir, I've worked with some surgeons, like this gynecologist of mine.
Pankaj, probably we might have wind up, I think Vinny looking at the clock. Both of us will finish. They will not call.
No, continue. Please continue,
Both
sir.
of us, I know it.
The thing is that if you see the patient preoperatively and if you dominate in the operation theater and if you visit your patients postoperatively, definitely you will get an edge. And I'm happy to say that in my hospital, my finance director put my charge as the highest, even more than a cardiologist and other people. The pre-anesthesia checkup charge.
Only why did you speak then? It's good. It's good, Murli. It's good. And I respect. No, question what it says, realize your potential. What it says, realize the potential, reach the unreached. You are good. Nobody is questioning your pharmacology, your clinical. Absolutely, you're fabulous. All of you. Just get arrange your time here and there.
Sir, one addition, sir. I'm Dr. Pandu Nayak from Hyderabad.
Yes, sir.
nowadays the practice is entirely this team-based practice. Previously, the freelancing practice was there. So the most of the charges are managed by the hospital administrators. It is not the surgeon or the practicing surgeon. So in that point of view, we can insist the hospital administration. So for a uniform or minimum honorable pay to the anesthesiologist team who is taking care of that hospital, that we can do, sir.
Okay, sir.
I think Giri is putting a button there. I think we have to stop here. I think Giri, please.
We have because topic is going in a different direction. Topic is going in a different direction.
I'm sorry. I'm stopping here. I'm stopping here.
I'm happy that even at this time there are 58 participants. There were 110 up to that. People are interested. That's the only thing which I want to say.
This is the dinner time, sir. That is the reason.
That is a demand.
So, Dr. Venkatagiri and Dr.
Maybe next meeting, maybe.
President Dr. Nazar, to give the concluding remarks.
No, my daughter was watching both the webinars today. First time. She has come at home and I told her.
You are lucky. So we will wind it up here, sir. Commissioner, sir.
We'll wind up, sir.
Binil, vote of thanks from Binil, please.
Yeah, before that, one word.
Okay.
Kameshwar Rao.
Tell me.
There was a comment for Madhusudan that his voice was very soothing and nice voice. There was a comment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Binil?
Thank you, sir. Before winding up, I thank Rajagopal sir for sparing us today evening some time from his busy schedule. Thank you, sir. We know him as a former HOD of Calicut Medical College Anesthesia Department. But rest of the world he is known as father of palliative care in India. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Madhusudan Upadhyaya for enlightening us and recollecting all the pitfalls which can happen in the OT during the surgery and how to tackle it. Thank you, sir. And sir is now working as a former HOD of KMC Medical College, Mangalore, and still he is working as a professor there itself. Thank you, sir. And I extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Muralidhar Joshi, our national president, for joining us today from the car itself, because immediately after the hospital he joined us through the phone, and after reaching the home again he was there still online from the beginning itself. Thank you, sir, for chairing the session. And I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. A.S. Kameshwar Rao, our national past president, for chairing the entire session and making his comments and expressing his views. Thank you, sir. I express my sincere thanks to Dr. Venkatagiri, our national president-elect, for arranging all the webinars, arranging the speakers, discussing about the topics. And thank you, sir, for organizing entire webinar. And I also extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Nasser, our state president, for helping me for organizing the entire webinar. I extend my sincere thanks to Mr. Praveen for solving the technical difficulties which we had met during the beginning of the webinar. Thank you, Praveen. And sincere thanks to all the participants who joined us today evening. Thank you all. Over to you, sir.